Hello, audio fans. I've been really interested in recent and well-made Class D amplifiers. What do they sound like in my system? How do they stack up to amps I already like? And do they bring something better or different to my setup? This commentary will talk about the sound of the Atma-Sphere amp, the monoblocks, on their own terms, and then I'll compare them a bit to a few other amps. So I've had the Atma-Sphere Class D monoblocks in my system for about 3 weeks, long enough to run them against everything else I own, and a couple of things I borrowed. This isn't a formal review, but I've tried to organize my listening sessions in a way that keeps all the variables and vocabulary constant, so my listening notes might teach me something about what I've been hearing. I hope this has value for you too. Let me say a word about my room and the system. Just to give you a context, my listening room is a well-treated and well-measured space. It's got good bass control, careful control over reflections and frequency bumps or dips, but it's not dead. I can hear individual instruments in precise locations across my soundstage with realistic width, depth, and height. My main speakers are from Prairie Audio. They're sealed cabinets, JBL 15-inch woofers, Beyma AMT tweeters, and they've got a 97 dB sensitivity and impedance that never drops below 5.5 ohms. Now, one word about their AMT tweeters. These are tweeters that are capable of really lovely and airy highs, but they need an amp that doesn't push them into sounding bright or forward, and this gives me a special test for Class D amplifiers. My front end has an Intel NUC streamer, and it feeds a Holo Audio Spring DAC. They're dead quiet, they're solid state, and the preamp, at least, is also from Prairie Audio. And I've got Townshend platforms underneath my speakers. All the tests that I did used really good sounding tracks, but not super audiophile music. All of the comparisons I did were level matched at 83.4 decibels, C weighting. The Atma-Sphere monoblocks take single-ended or true balanced inputs, and they run a custom-designed Class D module with GaN-FET output transistors, 1 chassis per channel. Output is rated at 100 watts per channel into 8 ohms, 200 into 4, with 22 decibels of gain, and they idle at a genuinely low 5 watts per channel. Each chassis is 13 inches deep, 11 inches wide, 3 inches high, and about 14 pounds in weight. These are pretty small footprints for what they put out, and they carry a 3-year general coverage warranty. Let's dig in a little bit to how they sound by comparing the Atma-Sphere with a couple of other Class D amplifiers. But first, let's talk about the Atma-Sphere. So one track I compared was Acoustic Jazz featuring Stacey Kent's vocals. In the track Comes Love, the Atma-Sphere was very even-handed and vocals felt present, even intimate. The bass sounded full and decently defined. Unlike some other Class D amplifiers, it wasn't super well defined, but that kept it from sounding, well, artificial. It just sounded like a bass. The sax solo had texture and the piano had true tonality and real percussive weight. The soundstage was good from side to side, if a little bit flat and a little bit narrow. There was a band in front of me. It was a real live band, but it wasn't 3D. On the Donald Fagen track, Tea House on the Tracks, the amp did its best work. It's a complex track with a lot of detail, but it came across as coherent and musical. There was a bounce to the music without sounding pushed or artificially hyped up, which is another pitfall, I think, for some Class D amps. Drums were crisp, but they kept their natural decay. There was no brittleness. Finally, the Atma-Sphere brought to life the wonderful classical guitar and string bass duo of Ralph Towner and Gary Peacock. Again, the bass was articulate and the guitar sounded natural, those nylon strings and those finger plucks and taps, and there was a really good sense that there were musicians in the room in a relationship with one another. I had another Class D amplifier around for contrast. This was a DIY unit built by Prairie Audio, and it's built around a VTV dual mono chassis housing the Hypex NCore NCX 500 module. It's got a custom input buffer and its own power supply per channel. It's rated for 500 watts into 4 ohms. After listening to all the tracks on this amp, the Atma-Sphere's character really came into better focus for me. By comparison, the Hypex pulled everything forward and made it flat. It was snappier, and the bass got more articulate than the Atma-Sphere. but at a real cost. The saxophone in the Stacey Kent track narrowed and picked up a slight edge, and the piano lost body. On the Donald Fagen track, the drums brightened and were punchier, but the overall coherence felt crammed and confused, with an overall shouty effect. There was no longer depth. Everything felt like it was happening on one forward plane. So I threw on a Vivaldi piece, and I went back and forth from the Hypex to the Atma-Sphere. Here we had an orchestra, with violins, oboes, horns, bassoon, cello. The Hypex resolved each instrument cleanly, but again the whole didn't cohere as an orchestra. It sounded more like a stereo playing an orchestra than an orchestra itself. Strings read thin, occasionally they were shrill, and the Atma-Sphere, on the same track, kept the ensemble together, but the violins were natural, the horns were clear and true, and there was a live musical event happening with its own space and dynamics. There were two other Class D amps roughly in the $6,000 price class of the Atma-Sphere. There's the $5,000 NAD M23 and the $8,000 AGD Audion Mark III monoblocks. I couldn't put all of these head-to-head with the Atma-Sphere. I was able to spend a decent amount of time with both of them, and I kept the variables constant and I took a lot of notes. So the NAD and the AGD had their signatures, and they did provide a useful context. First off, both the NAD and the AGD are really exciting amplifiers. They're like sports car, lots of torque, fast off the mark. The Atma-Sphere is no slouch, but it's a Mercedes sedan, not a Ferrari. The speed of those amps was what attracted me to them, and I think because of their quickness and their dynamic punch, they also got a bit exhausting. And so these trade-offs made me want to keep trying Class Ds and eventually led me towards borrowing an Atma-Sphere. So let's talk a second about the NAD M23. It's very quick and daring, and it's got some of the same issues of the Hypex. It's bright, overly forward, and occasionally it has strident tonalities. But the AGD, on the other hand, didn't have those issues of the Hypex. It's another GAN-FET amp like the Atma-Sphere, but in its third iteration. But it has superior separation and soundstage and dynamic punch. These qualities, though, the quickness, again, the dynamic speed, can also tilt against an amp's ability to have just the music neutrality. In other words, if you want a more neutral, get-out-of-the-way Class D amplifier, the Atma-Sphere is the amp to get. Before ending this commentary, let me ask an obvious question. Would I get rid of my tube or my Class A amplifiers? No. I did extensive comparisons between the Atma-Sphere amp and the PassLabs XA25, which I think in August 2026 is retailing around $5,600. It beats the Atma-Sphere in multiple categories. The bass is clear, it's full, it has lots of punch and warmth in the mid-bass region and of course in the bass region. It's got a toe-tapping energy in the dynamics, and the instruments and the voices all sound real. They're really present. They have full tonal colors. The music has body, and everything just sounds more coherent and more alive. I know this is very metaphorical ways of putting things, but that's just what I heard. Well, what about tubes? The ST-35 is an amp that I love, and I am a tube guy at heart, so I threw it into the mix. A little bit of an apples and oranges comparison, but because Atma-Sphere has been a tube company for so long, it seemed like a reasonable comparison to make. If Class D is going to replace tubes, why not compare them? On the Towner and Peacock duo track, the bass was boomier on the ST-35, but the guitar was more natural, and it conveyed an even better sense of two people playing together compared to the Atma-Sphere. But when I put on the Vivaldi, that reopened the gap in the Atma-Sphere's favor. The soundstage was good with the ST-35, but it wasn't as convincing as the Atma-Sphere. The takeaway, I think, is pretty cool. The Atma-Sphere beat my tube amp on orchestral music, and that's not what I expected. So the bottom line is that the Atma-Sphere's advantage over other amplifiers is in its consistency in doing very well the basics of an amplifier. It has a wide, if not deep, soundstage. It has natural tonalities and balance across the frequencies. It has good dynamics and transients that are handled with ease. These consistently good traits are amplified by the fact that the Atma-Sphere is never shouty and it's never cursed with the glare that some have associated with Class D topologies. Companies like Atma-Sphere and AGD have shown that such assumptions are no longer fair. These amps can and do make music. So I'm still not trading out my tube or Class A amplifiers, though. They make me happy. They have warmth and depth. And by these lights, Class D is not there yet for me. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching.